The death of Liberal Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg sparks a new political battle 6 weeks before the US presidential election. Donald Trump expected to nominate her successor within days. A rare hurricane-like storm kills 2 people in Greece. Storm Yanos is causing floods and power cuts and uprooting trees from the Western Islands to the south and center of the country. And riot police in Belarus arrest hundreds of women marching against President Alexander Lukashenko. It comes amid a widening crackdown on opposition leaders and protesters. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Julia Kim. First, 6 weeks before the US presidential election, the death of Liberal Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has introduced fresh uncertainty to the nation's future. The bid to replace her has sparked a new political battle in an already hostile campaign. President Trump has announced he'll name a conservative successor in the coming days. He's urged the Republican-run Senate to consider filling the now vacant seat, quote, without delay. France 24's Ketavan Gorgistani has the latest from Washington.
If Donald Trump gets to nominate whoever he wants to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right now, before her death, the balance of power was already a little bit in favor of conservatives because they held a majority 5-4. With the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that majority is now 5-3. And if Donald Trump manages to appoint a conservative, then it would be 6-3 for conservatives, knowing that whoever he appoints will be very conservative, just like the 2 previous ones that he's appointed. So the balance of power for a generation will be heavily conservative. That means that for all the big decisions that the Supreme Court makes, the conservatives will have the power. It won't be something that will be balanced out. It will be overwhelmingly conservative. And the first major concrete issue that will be at stake is Roe versus Wade, the landmark decision that really constitutionalized pretty much the right for women to get an abortion. That is going to be under threat. Yesterday, I was on the steps of the Supreme Court just hours after news of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing, and as the crowds grew, a conservative man came and started screaming and chanting that Roe v. Wade was dead and gone. This is a key issue for conservatives, and this will be the first thing that they take up because they've been pushing these decisions to the Supreme Court. There was one just recently, a few months ago, and there have been hundreds of laws on the state level across the country trying to limit those abortion rights. And the Republicans want to bring those decisions to the Supreme Court. And if they have the majority, they could very well overturn Roe v. Wade. And that's something all the people I spoke to yesterday were very, very worried about, especially the liberal women who came to pay tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Well, moving on now, 2 people have died and 1 person is missing after a rare hurricane-like storm lashed central Greece. Hundreds had to be rescued from flooded buildings in regions north of Athens. On Friday, Storm Yanos uprooted trees and caused power cuts on the Ionian Islands and the western Peloponnese. Mediterranean cyclones like Yanos were first recorded in Greece in 1995, but have become more frequent in recent years. Camille Nedelec has more.
Trapped on the roof of his car as the floodwaters closed in. This man was one of the more than 600 people that had to be rescued by firefighters after a European hurricane, known as a medicane, hit parts of Greece over the weekend. Flash flooding and winds of over 100 kilometers per hour left at least 2 people dead in central Greece, including an elderly lady found in her flooded home and a 63-year-old shepherd who was swept away. Medicane Yanos first made landfall on the west of Greece on Friday.
Η κατάσταση είναι πρωτόγνωρη. Είμαι 37 χρόνια εδώ πέρα. Πρώτη φορά αντιμετωπίζουμε αυτό τον εφιάλτη. Είμαι όλη μέρα από τη νύχτα άυπνος μέχρι αυτή τη στιγμή που σας μιλάω. Η κατάσταση είναι τραγική. Έχει χαλάσει όλο το μαγαζί μπροστά. Το κατεδαφίζει ο αέρας. Για πρώτη φορά βλέπω τόσο πολύ δυνατό αέρα που δεν σταματάει καθόλου εδώ και ένα 24ωρο τώρα.
5 vessels are known to have sunk. Since Thursday night, emergency services received almost 2,500 calls about fallen trees and property damage. Some towns are still without electricity, and trains between the north and south of the country have been suspended. The first recorded Medicaid in Greece was in 1995, and they've since become more frequent. And researchers warn that climate change is making them more powerful.
Well, anti-government protests in Thailand are back on the streets calling for democratic reforms. Police say at least 18,000 people have taken part in this latest rally in Bangkok. Organisers say it will be the biggest protest in years, with tens of thousands expected to turn out this weekend. Near-daily rallies have been gathering steam since mid-July, demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. The movement also wants reforms to the ultra-wealthy and powerful monarchy.
Shut out but not deterred. Protesters urged officials to open the gates to Thammasat University campus before taking matters into their own hands and settling down on the university's football field. Demonstrators are calling for the removal of the Prime Minister, free and fair elections and a new constitution. They also want the intimidation of political activists to stop and for the king's powers to be curbed. That's an especially controversial demand in a country where anybody who criticises the royal family could go to prison for up to 15 years.
จำนวนประชาชนที่มาณที่แห่งนี้แสดงให้เห็นว่าประชาชนเขารับไม่ได้กับระบบนี้แล้วและปรารถนาจะเห็นการเปลี่ยนแปลงซึ่งถ้าไม่ตอบสนองกับข้อเรียกร้อง10ข้อเชิงปฏิรูปก็อาจจะนำมาสู่สถานการณ์ที่ยกระดับขึ้นไปสู่การปฏิวัติได้นะฮะอันนี้ก็จะกระทบต่อการดำรงอยู่ของสถาบันกษัตริย์ในประเทศไทย
Protests are expected to last for the whole of the weekend, including near the palace and official buildings, raising fears that the demonstrations could trigger clashes with police. Organisers say they expect a total turnout of at least 50,000 people.
Let's turn now to Belarus, where riot police have arrested hundreds of women in the capital, Minsk. Around 2,000 women took part, demanding the end of President Alexander Lukashenko's rule. His crackdown on the protests has prompted the European Union to weigh fresh sanctions against his government. Thousands of people have been detained and beaten by police, while nearly all the opposition's key leaders have either been arrested or forced to leave the country. Well, for more, let's go live to France 24's Nick Holdsworth, who's coming to us from Moscow. Nick, protesters are showing no signs of letting up despite a broadening crackdown.
Absolutely. This is now the 6th week of protests. There's been about 4 or 5 weeks of regular Saturday protests by women. These women are out in force again today. Hundreds of arrests on what was called the Sparkly March. Women turned out wearing red and white, the colours of the opposition, with shiny and sparkly accessories. That didn't stop police wading in and literally pulling women with their linked arms into police vans. Some of those arrested managed to get away. One of the opposition news sites quoted a couple of young women who had been pushed into a police van, only for the police to say there wasn't enough room for them, and they told them to go to another van. The women just walked away unchallenged. Also arrested today was Nina Baginskaya, the 73-year-old woman who's become a kind of figurehead, a kind of grandmother of the movement, although she was later released at a suburban police station. Not as much violence today as we've seen in previous weekends, but certainly no sign of these protests letting up, and the pressure still being put upon Lukashenko to cede concessions to the opposition. They're demanding that new elections are called and that he step down, of course.
Now, of course, Putin meeting with Lukashenko last week. What's Russia's view of the situation?
Well, so far, very much Moscow is playing a game supporting Lukashenko's regime. In those talks between Presidents Lukashenko and Putin last Monday in Sochi, Moscow offered $1.5 billion in loans to prop up the regime in Minsk, although they held back from sending troops in, which is something that Lukashenko has been asking of the Russians, although, of course, Russian paratroopers have begun this last week joint exercises in Belarus with the Belarusian forces, and next week Belarusian forces are going to be in the southern Caucasus in Russia on joint exercise with the Russian army. Now this is something which is also taking place in the West. British paratroopers have today flown in and landed in Ukraine for joint exercise in Ukraine, so that's part of the wider context.
Okay, Nick Holdsworth, we'll have to leave it there. Nick Holdsworth there reporting to us from Moscow. Now, France has reported 13,215 new coronavirus cases over the past 24 hours. It marks a new record since the start of the pandemic. Now, the increase has been put down to a faster circulation of the virus and a six-fold increase in tests ever since they were made free. As the infection rate increases, the most affected areas in France have tightened restrictions. Like Marseille and Bordeaux, Nice will ban gatherings of more than 10 people in public spaces and force bars to close early. No such measures, though, have been announced in Paris. Well, if you're showing symptoms of COVID-19, France's public health body has given the green light for coronavirus saliva tests. They're a pain-free alternative to the nasal swab test and are said to reduce the risk of contamination for medical staff. Mario Sofos tells us more.
A COVID-19 test that's carried out either by providing a saliva sample in a test tube or by scraping the inside of the cheek with a swab, avoiding the invasive nasal swab. The French National Authority for Health is authorising such tests under certain conditions. The main question on the minds of experts: how effective are the tests? According to the results of a study published this summer, they are slightly less sensitive than the nasal swab, but are nonetheless usable.
La bonne nouvelle, c'est que chez les personnes qui ont des symptômes, leurs performances sont suffisantes pour pouvoir être acceptables.
On the other hand, saliva tests carried out on people without symptoms detect only 1 in 4 positive cases of COVID-19. It's therefore not recommended for use in these cases. So, what is the use of these tests? The aim is to facilitate the taking of samples. Their effectiveness has been supported by the findings of researchers in Guyana who compared the saliva test to the nasal swab.
The saliva test is far simpler. It doesn't require trained personnel, and it can be done alone.
Experts say that the saliva test should be reserved for people who react badly to the nasal swab, such as children and older people. The tests were given the green light by the French National Authority for Health on Friday. It's yet to be revealed if the test will be covered by French health insurance.
Now, the cultural sector has been especially hard hit by the coronavirus pandemic, with new restrictions on crowd sizes forcing many theatres to halt productions. Here in the French capital, the La Voix Moderne Parisien was just one such venue under threat. But following Paris City Hall's decision to buy the theatre, the show will now go on. Claire Rush reports.
It inspired one of the most famous French writers of all time. The 19th century lavoir, or public washhouse, described by Émile Zola in his celebrated novel L'Assommoir, is now home to a theatre, the Lavoir Moderne Parisien. After months of closure due to the coronavirus pandemic, the venue has reopened its doors, delighting these audience members.
C'est le lavoir de Zola, je veux dire, donc voilà, c'est un lieu, quoi, c'est un vrai lieu.
Quand on a pensé que ce lieu-là était menacé par les promoteurs, devait éventuellement être détruit, devenir un super U ou un parking ou je ne sais quoi, ça fait un peu mal au cœur quand même.
Years of financial troubles had threatened to shutter the theater, the coronavirus pandemic only worsening an already dire situation. But the historic venue was saved from that fate in July when it was preempted or bought by the city of Paris.
Ça fait 4 ans qu'on donne de nos personnes, de notre temps, de notre énergie, et que prouver, montrer que ce lieu mérite de vivre dans un quartier comme celui-ci, il est nécessaire.
As it was during the time of Zola, the Goutte d'Or neighborhood remains working class and has since become a multicultural melting pot. For the theater, operating in such an area is key.
Ce qui est important, c'est de ne pas être un îlot déconnecté du quartier, c'est aussi d'être un théâtre donc, de quartier qui travaille avec les habitants, qui travaille avec les associations, avec l'éducation nationale aussi.
Making culture accessible for all, a goal also shared by City Hall.
Nous, ce qu'on souhaite en tant que ville de Paris, c'est qu'il y ait des lieux culturels partout, que les habitants des quartiers populaires puissent accéder à n'importe quel lieu culturel.
For now, the Lavoir Moderne Parisien can continue its mission, working to ensure everyone is able to experience the rich cultural life that the French capital has to offer.
And that's it from us. There's more news coming up. Stay tuned to France 24.